The sound of a silver spoon striking the side of a crystal wine glass shouldn't sound like a gavel, sentencing a criminal, but at my family's Christmas dinner, that was exactly what it felt like. The sharp, piercing ding cut through the ambient jazz of the restaurant, silencing the table. All eyes turned to my mother. She wasn't proposing a toast to health or happiness. She was pointing her manicured finger directly at my chest, or rather at the stain on my cheap blouse that I hadn't noticed until that very second. She laughed. It wasn't a warm, maternal chuckle. It was a dry, brittle sound, like dead leaves being crushed under a boot. She looked at my father, then back at me, shaking her head with a theatrical display of pity. She asked the table, loud enough for the neighboring diners to hear, if this was really the best I could do. She asked if, after 30 years of life, after all the tuition money they had wasted on me, my biggest contribution to society was serving pasta to people who actually mattered. I felt the heat rise up my neck, burning my ears. My hands were trembling beneath the tablecloth. I gripped the heavy linen napkin, twisting the fabric around my fingers until they turned white, trying to ground myself. I looked around the table. My older brother, Marcus, the golden child, the investment banker with the smile that didn't quite reach his cold eyes, smirked. He took a sip of his Pinot Noir and muttered that someone had to wash the dishes, and maybe that was simply my ceiling in life. My father didn't even look at me. That was worse than the laughter. He was busy cutting his steak, sawing through the meat with precise, aggressive strokes. He simply sighed, a heavy exhale of disappointment that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. He commented to the air that it was embarrassing to be seen in a place like this with someone dressed like a servant. He said they should have left me at home, or better yet, left me to pick up an extra shift, since I clearly needed the tips more than I needed family time. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to tell them that the cheap blouse was actually a vintage silk piece from a designer they couldn't pronounce. I wanted to tell them that the reason I looked tired wasn't because I was scrubbing floors, but because I had just flown in from a board meeting in Tokyo. But I did. I swallowed the lump in my throat, tasting the bitter bile of years of rejection. I sat there paralyzed by the old familiar feeling of being small, of being the mistake, the smudge on the pristine portrait of the illusion they called a family. The waiter approached our table then. He was a young man, terrified, his hands shaking as he held the water pitcher. I recognized him. His name was Leo. I had hired him 3 months ago because he had a newborn daughter and needed a second chance. He looked at me, his eyes widening in recognition. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to greet me by my title, but I shot him a sharp, desperate look. "Don't," my eyes pleaded. "Not yet." Leo hesitated, confused, but he nodded imperceptibly. He poured the water for my mother, his hand trembling slightly. My mother, she snapped at him to be careful, telling him that the suit he was almost splashing cost more than his entire education. Leo flinched. I saw the shame in his eyes, the same shame I had felt 1,000 times in this house. That was the moment. That was the spot. Watching her demean him, watching her treat a human being like furniture, something inside me hardened. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. They thought they were dining with a failure. They had no idea they were sitting in the belly of the beast, and I was the one holding the leash. To understand why I sat there and took their abuse, you have to understand the history of the Golden family. My parents didn't just value success, they worshipped it. Appearance was their religion. If you weren't a doctor, a lawyer, or a banker, you were invisible. Growing up, I was the artist. I was the dreamer. I was the one who wanted to build things, not just manage money. And for that, I was punished. 10 years ago, the night of my high school graduation, they gave me an ultimatum. I remember it vividly. The air in the living room was stagnant, smelling of lemon polish and judgment. My father held out an envelope. It was an acceptance letter to a law school I hadn't applied to. He had pulled strings. He told me that I would go, I would become a corporate attorney, and I would marry a man from a good family. When I told them I wanted to study hospitality management, that I wanted to create experiences, that I wanted to own restaurants, my mother actually slapped me. It wasn't a hard slap, but the shock of it shattered something between us. She told me to get out. She said that if I wanted to serve people, I could go do it on the street. They cut me off. No money, no contact. Family. I left with a backpack and $200. I spent the first year sleeping on a friend's couch, working double shifts at a greasy diner. I smelled like old frying oil and despair. But I learned. I watched how the owner managed inventory. I learned how to talk to customers, how to make them feel special, even when they were eating a $5 burger. I saved every penny. I didn't buy clothes. I didn't go to parties. I worked. 5 years ago, I took a gamble. I found a failing bistro in a gentrifying neighborhood. It was a dump, infested with rats and debt. I used my savings for a down payment and took out a loan with an interest rate that was practically criminal. I slept in the storage room on a cot for 2 years. I was the chef, the waitress, the accountant, and the janitor. But it worked. The bistro became the spot, then came the second location, then the steakhouse, then the high-end fusion concept in downtown, and finally, the Obsidian Group, my holding company. Today, I own 35 premium restaurants across the state, including the very one we were sitting in right now, Luminary. Luminary was my crown jewel, Michelin-starred, reserved months in advance, a place where politicians and celebrities came to be seen. My parents had no idea. To them, I was just the daughter who disappeared and resurfaced once a year for the obligatory holiday humiliation, looking ragged because I worked 18-hour days running an empire. They assumed my silence over the years was shame. They assumed I hadn't reached out because I had failed. The truth was, I hadn't reached out because I was busy building a throne they couldn't even afford to look at. I invited them to Luminary for Christmas, not to reconnect, but to test them. A small part of me, the little girl who just wanted her dad to be proud, hoped that maybe, just maybe, if they saw me, even without knowing my success, they would treat me with basic human decency. I wanted to see if they could love the waitress as much as they would love the CEO. I looked across the table at Marcus. He was bragging about a merger that I knew for a fact had fallen through last week, because my company had outbid his firm for the commercial real estate. He was lying through his teeth, puffing up his chest, and my parents were lapping it up like kittens with cream. My mother turned her gaze back to me. She picked at her salad, lifting a leaf of arugula as if it were a dead insect. She commented on the decor of the restaurant. She said it was trying too hard. She said the lighting was too dim, probably to hide the rats. She laughed at her own joke. I took a sip of my water. It was filtered, alkaline water, served at exactly 40 degrees, just as I had mandated in the operational handbook. I wrote every detail in this room, from the velvet of the chairs to the frequency of the music, came from my mind. They were insulting my art while sitting inside it. My father cleared his throat. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. He tossed it across the table. It landed in my soup bowl, splashing broth onto the tablecloth. He told me to take it. He said maybe I could buy myself a decent haircut, or perhaps use it to tip the staff so they wouldn't look at me with such disdain. He said it was a Christmas gift, since he knew I couldn't afford to buy them anything. The $20 bill floated in the lobster bisque. I stared at it. That was the line, the final boundary. The hope that they had changed, that they possessed a shred of empathy, died in that bowl of soup. I slowly reached into the bowl. My fingers didn't tremble this time. I plucked the soggy bill out of the bisque and laid it on the white tablecloth. The orange stain spread slowly, like blood. I looked up at my father. I didn't blink. The fear was gone. The daughter was gone. The president had arrived. The $20 bill lay on the tablecloth, like a declaration of war, soaking up the lobster bisque and turning a grotesque shade of orange. I didn't wipe it up. I didn't ask for a new napkin. I just let it sit there, a wet, humiliating monument to my father's cruelty. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on, but my mother, ever the socialite, decided to break it not with an apology, but with a complaint about the atmosphere. She leaned in, whispering loudly that the service here was slippery. She pointed out that our water glasses had been empty for 3 minutes. She said it was typical of these trendy places to focus on mood lighting rather than basic competence. She looked at me with a smirk and said that perhaps I should go back to the kitchen and give them some tips, since that was my area of expertise. My brother, Marcus, chuckled. He signaled for the sommelier, snapping his fingers in the air, a gesture I strictly forbade in my employee training manuals. When the sommelier, a dignified older man named Arthur whom I had poached from a 3-star restaurant in Paris, arrived at the table, Marcus didn't even look him in the eye. He simply pointed at the wine list and demanded the 1982 Waitress. I saw Arthur hesitate. The bottle cost $6,000. He glanced at me, his eyes darting nervously to the subtle pin on my lapel, the obsidian lapel pin that only the executive board members wore. I gave him a micro nod. Let them dig, I thought. Let them dig until they hit the core of the earth. Arthur bowed and retreated. My father looked at Marcus with beaming pride. He praised Marcus for his taste, for his ability to command a room, for being a man of substance. Then he turned his cold eyes back to me. He started a story, one I had heard 1,000 times, about a cousin of ours who had found herself at 35 and finally married a dentist. He said there was still hope for me, that if I cleaned myself up and stopped playing rebel, maybe Marcus could introduce me to one of the junior associates at his firm. Someone who didn't mind a fixer-upper. I gripped my fork. The metal dug into my palm. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. They were drinking my wine, sitting in my chairs, eating food prepared by my executive chef, all while discussing how to salvage my pathetic existence. Then came the coup de grace. My mother decided she wanted to speak to the manager. She wasn't happy with the table location. She felt a draft. She wanted to be moved to the VIP section, the elevated mezzanine that overlooked the city skyline. I knew for a fact the VIP section was fully booked for a private event hosted by the mayor, an event I was supposed to be hosting before I decided to endure this dinner. She waved her hand aggressively. A floor manager, Sarah, hurried over. Sarah was new, only 2 weeks on the job. She looked terrified. My mother launched into a tirade. She said it was unacceptable that we were seated near the kitchen door. She claimed she could smell the dishwater. She demanded to be moved immediately, and she dropped the "do you know who my son is" line, gesturing to Marcus as if he were royalty. Sarah stammered. She tried to explain that the restaurant was at full capacity. She apologized profusely, but my father wasn't having it. He slammed his hand on the table, causing the silverware to jump. He raised his voice, shouting that the service was incompetent, that the staff was useless, and then, looking directly at me, he said it was no wonder I worked in this industry, because it was clearly a haven for idiots who couldn't get real jobs. The entire restaurant went quiet. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The ambient jazz seemed to stop. Every eye in the room was on us. My face felt cold, not hot, cold. The ice in my veins had frozen over completely. Marcus laughed nervously, enjoying the He told the manager that she better fetch the owner, or he would make sure this place was reviewed into oblivion. He pulled out his phone, threatening to tweet about it to his 2,000 followers. Sarah looked at me, her eyes filling with tears, pleading for help without saying a word. She didn't know who I was. I usually entered through the back during site visits, but she saw a woman who was part of this table. I didn't move. I didn't defend them. I just watched. I watched them bully a 20-year-old girl. I watched them flaunt money they didn't have compared to the capital flowing through the walls of this building. I checked my watch. It was 8:15 p.m. At 8:15 p.m., Strictly, the regional director of operations, did his rounds. The double doors to the kitchen swung open with authority. The conversation in the room didn't just resume, it shifted. A man walked out. He was 6'4", wearing a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than my parents' car. This was Julian, my right hand, the man I trusted to run the entire Eastern Seaboard division of the Obsidian Group. He didn't walk, he glided. His presence commanded absolute respect. He saw the commotion at table 12 immediately. He saw Sarah wiping her eyes. He saw my father's red, angry face. And then he saw me. He stopped dead in his tracks. My parents mistook his pause for intimidation. My father stood up, puffing out his chest, ready to berate this new challenger. He started shouting before Julian could take another step. He told Julian that his staff was incompetent, that the food was subpar, and that his daughter, pointing a jagged finger at me, could probably do a better job running this place, which was the biggest insult he could think of. Julian didn't even blink at my father. He didn't look at Mark. He didn't look at my mother. His eyes were locked on me with an intensity that was almost religious. He walked past my father as if he were a ghost. He walked past the trembling Sarah, gently touching her shoulder to dismiss her. He came to a stop directly beside my chair. The restaurant was dead silent now. My father was left standing there, mouth open, confused by being ignored. Julian turned his body so his back was to my family. He bowed. It wasn't a small, polite nod. It was a deep, formal bow from the waist, the kind you give to royalty or a head of state. He straightened up, produced a leather-bound folio from under his arm, and held it out to me with both hands. He spoke, his voice deep and projecting clearly to every corner of the silent room. He said, "Good evening, Madam President. I apologize for the interrupts. The acquisition papers for the Savoy hotel chain just came through from London. The legal team needs your signature before the markets open in Tokyo. I wouldn't have disturbed your dinner, but you marked this as priority alpha." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. The air left the room. My father slowly sat down, his legs hitting the chair as if his strings had been cut. My mother's fork clattered onto her plate. Marcus froze, his glass of Petrus halfway to his lips, the wine tilting dangerously. I didn't look at them. I looked at Julian. I reached out and took the folio. I opened it. The contract was there, stamped confidential with a purchase price listed in the 9 figures. I clicked my pen, a heavy Mont Blanc pen I pulled from my cheap purse. I signed the document with a flourish. I handed the folio back to Julian. "Thank you, Julian," I said, my voice calm, steady, and terrifyingly authoritative. "And Julian, the lighting in the northeast corner is off by 5%. Fix it. And tell the chef the bisque is excellent, but the plating needs more height." "At once, ma'am," Julian replied. He didn't leave. He stood at attention, waiting for further orders. I finally turned my head to look at my family. The transformation was grotesque. My father looked like he was having a stroke. His face was pale, his eyes bulging. My mother was gasping for air, her hand clutching her purse. Marcus was the first to speak. His voice cracked, a high-pitched squeak that betrayed his complete shattering. He asked, "Madam President, what is he talking about? You're a waitress." I picked up the wet, orange $20 bill from the table. I held it up between 2 fingers, letting it dangle like a dead rat. "I'm not a waitress, Marcus," I said softly. "I'm the owner, not just of this restaurant, but of the building, the block, and the holding company that just rejected your firm's application for a line of credit yesterday." I dropped the $20 bill into Marcus's wine glass. It splashed into the $6,000 vintage. "And you're sitting in my seat." My mother started to cry, not tears of joy, tears of terror. She realized, in that second, that every cruel word, every laugh, every dismissal over the last 10 years hadn't been directed at a failure. They had been directed at the person who now held their fate in her hands. Julian cleared his throat. He asked loud and clear, "Madam President, are these guests disturbing you? Security is on standby." I looked at my father, the man who had just told me I wasn't worth the cost of a meal. I looked at my mother, who had laughed at my clothes. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Actually, Julian," I said, "I think they were just leaving." The silence that hung over table 12 was no longer awkward. It was heavy, crushing, like the pressure at the bottom of the ocean. My father sputtered, his face cycling through shades of purple and gray. He tried to laugh, a desperate, hacking sound that died instantly in the quiet room. He leaned forward, his hands shaking as he tried to rearrange his features into something resembling a smile. He stammered that it was a joke. He said they were just teasing me, that it was their way of showing affection, that surely I understood their sense of humor. He tried to reach for my hand, the same hand he had refused to look at 10 minutes ago. I pulled my hand back as if his touch were corrosive. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I leaned in, matching his posture, and told him that humor requires a punchline. And the only joke I saw at this table was the assumption that they could treat people like garbage without consequences. My mother tried a different tact. The tears she had started shedding turned into a weaponized display of maternal grief. She clutched her napkin to her chest and wailed softly. She asked how I could do this to my own flesh and blood. She said they were my parents, that they had sacrificed everything for me, that this display of arrogance was unbecoming of a lady. She looked at Julian, then at the surrounding diners, playing the victim, trying to garner sympathy for the poor, elderly couple being bullied by their successful, heartless daughter. I looked at her. I saw the manipulation. I saw the gears turning. It didn't work anymore. The spell was broken. I told her that she was right about one thing. Appearance was everything. And right now they looked like trespassers. Marcus was the only one who wasn't speaking, was staring at the $20 bill, floating in his $6,000 wine. His face was pale, sweat beading on his upper lip. He was doing the math. He was realizing that the Obsidian Group I had just mentioned was the same conglomerate his firm had been desperately trying to court for the last 6 months. He realized that the rejection email he received yesterday, the one that had likely cost him his promotion, had come from my office. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow. He whispered that I had ruined him. He said the partners would find out. He said I had sabotaged his career out of spite. I stood up. The movement was sharp, final. I corrected him. I told him I didn't sabotage anything. I simply enforced a standard. I told him that my companies only do business with people of integrity. And based on his behavior tonight, berating a waiter, snapping at a sommelier, and mocking a woman he thought was poor, he didn't meet the criteria. I told him he did this to himself. I turned to Julian. I gave a small nod. Julian signaled to the shadows near the entrance. Two large men in dark suits stepped forward. They weren't bouncers. They were executive protection officers. They moved with silent, terrifying efficiency. My father stood up, outraged. He demanded to know what was happening. He shouted that he wasn't leaving until he finished his steak. He tried to pull rank, screaming that he was a paying customer. I smiled. I looked at Arthur, the sommelier. I told him to bring the check. Arthur appeared instantly with a black leather folder. He placed it gently in front of my father. My father opened it aggressively, expecting perhaps that family meant a free meal. His eyes bulged when he saw the total. The 1982 Petrus alone was $6,000. The total bill, with the chef's tasting menu they had ordered without looking at the prices, came to nearly $8,000. My father looked at me, his jaw slack. He whispered that he couldn't pay this. He said he didn't have that kind of limit on his card. He looked at me with pleading eyes. The arrogance finally stripped away, leaving just a small, cheap man. He asked me to take care of it, just this once, for old time's sake. I looked down at him. I told him that if he needed money, he could always pick up an extra shift. I heard they were hiring dishwashers at the diner down the street. I turned to Arthur and told him to process the payment. If the card declined, I told him to call the police for theft of services. I didn't wait to see the outcome. I turned my back on them. Escort them out, I said to the security team, and make sure they don't disturb the other guests on their way. As I walked toward the kitchen, leaving the dining room, I heard the commotion. I heard my father arguing about the bill. I heard my mother sobbing, and then I heard the applause. It started slow, a single clap from a table near the window, and then it spread. The diners, the people who had watched this family belittle the staff all night, started clapping. It wasn't a thunderous ovation, but a low, steady ripple of approval. I didn't look back. I walked through the kitchen doors, where the entire staff was waiting. Leo, the waiter they had humiliated, was standing there. He was smiling. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. I nodded back. 6 months later, the office was quiet, the city lights of New York twinkling below my panoramic window. I sat at my desk, reviewing the quarterly reports for the Obsidian Group. Profits were up 12%. The new hotel acquisition in London was a massive success. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Sarah, the same Sarah who had been the floor manager that night, knocked on the door. She walked in holding a tablet. She told me there was a gentleman in the lobby asking to see me. She said he didn't have an appointment, but he claimed to be family. I asked who it was. She hesitated. She said it was Marcus. She told me he looked unwell. I turned my chair to face the window. I thought about it. I thought about the years of insults. I thought about the $20 bill in the soup. I thought about the way he looked at Leah. I asked Sarah what he wanted. She said he was asking for a job. Any job. She said he had been let go from his firm shortly after the incident, when the partners found out he had insulted their biggest potential client. He had been blacklisted in the city. No reputable bank would touch. He was desperate. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I saw the woman they had tried to break. I saw the president. I told Sarah to send him away. She nodded, turning to leave, but I stopped her. Wait, I said. I opened my desk drawer. I pulled out a single, crisp $20 bill. I walked over to Sarah and handed it to her. Give him this, I said. Tell him it's a gift. Tell him maybe he can use it to buy a decent haircut, or perhaps use it to tip the staff on his way out. Sarah smiled. Genuine, knowing smile. She took the bill. I'll deliver the message personally, Madam President, she said. She closed the door. I turned back to the window, looking out at the city I had conquered. I took a sip of water. It was filtered, alkaline, and exactly 40 degrees. It tasted like victory.
The centerpiece of the Thanksgiving table was a 20-pound turkey, golden brown and glistening with truffle oil, but the real main course was supposed to be my dignity. My Aunt Victoria sat at the head of the table, her fingers laden with diamonds that I knew were insured for more than my parents' entire house. She tapped her crystal goblet with a silver spoon, the sharp ding-ding-ding silencing the chatter of the 20 guests assembled in her dining hall. It was time for the annual toast of gratitude. In any other family, this would be a moment to give thanks for health or happiness. In the Hawthorne family, it was a competitive sport. It was a chance to list your assets, your acquisitions, and your quarterly bonuses, while passive-aggressively shaming anyone who hadn't made the cover of Forbes. I sat at the far end of the table, on a folding chair. They hadn't set a place for me at the main mahogany table. I was relegated to the overflow section, squeezed between a decorative fern and the kitchen swing door. I was 31 years old, but to them I was still little Jimmy, the college dropout, the dreamer, the one who threw away his potential to play around with computers in a basement while the adults did real business. Aunt Victoria cleared her throat. She smoothed the front of her Chanel dress, a prototype from her own fashion line, Victor & Co. She looked down the long table, her eyes landing on me with a mixture of pity and disgust. She said she was thankful that despite the economic downturn, her fashion empire had opened 3 new flagship stores in Tokyo. She said she was thankful for her son, my cousin Preston, who had just launched his cryptocurrency exchange, Coin. She said she was thankful that talent ran in the bloodline. Then she paused. The room went silent. She smiled that tight, venomous smile, and she continued, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. I am thankful that we have the means to provide a warm meal for those family members who struggle. We pray that next year, James might finally find a stable job, perhaps in retail. I hear the mall is hiring for the holiday season. The table erupted in polite, cruel laughter. My uncle Marcus, a heavy-set man who owned a massive logistics and trucking fleet, chortled. He raised his glass of scotch. He shouted that I shouldn't worry, because the world always needs people to scrub the toilets at the truck stops. Then came the mini-boss, my cousin Preston. He was 26, wearing a hoodie under a blazer, looking like every Silicon Valley stereotype rolled into one obnoxious package. He didn't just laugh, he wanted to perform. He stood up and walked over to my folding chair. He pulled out his phone, the newest model of course. He turned on the flash. "Say cheese, Jimmy," he shouted, blinding me with the light. "I'm live streaming to my followers. I'm doing a charity segment, Feed the Needy. Smile, buddy. You're going to get me so many likes." He shoved the phone in my face. He asked me to tell his followers what it felt like to be the family failure. He asked if I wanted him to Venmo me $5 for a haircut. I didn't blink. I didn't shield my eyes. I just looked at the camera lens. I asked him if his followers knew that CoinEpex was currently under investigation by the SEC for liquidity issues. Preston stopped laughing. He lowered the phone. He sneered at me. He told me to shut up. He said I was just jealous because he made more in a minute than I made in a decade. He poured a splash of his wine onto my plate, ruining my food. "Oops," he said. "Clumsy me. Enjoy the soggy stuffing, failure." He walked back to his seat, high-fiving his father. I looked down at the wine-soaked turkey. I felt the anger in my chest, but it wasn't hot. It was cold. Absolute zero. They thought I was unemployed because I didn't wear a suit. They thought I was broke because I drove a Honda. They didn't know that for the last 7 years, I hadn't just been playing with computers. I had been building Argus Capital, a private equity firm specializing in distressed assets and hostile takeovers. I wasn't unemployed. I was the shark swimming beneath their little boats. And tonight I wasn't here for the turkey. I was here for the acquisition. To understand the satisfaction of this moment, you have to understand the history. My parents died when I was 20. Victoria and Marcus were the executors of the estate. They drained it. They claimed administrative fees and legal costs until my inheritance was zero. They used my parents' money to seed Preston's first startup and to bail out Victoria's failing fashion line in 2018. They left me with nothing but student loans and a good luck card. I dropped out of college, not because I was lazy, but because I couldn't afford tuition. I taught myself algorithmic trading. I built a bot that predicted market crashes. I turned $5,000 into 50 into a million into a billion. I kept my name off the headlines. I used shell companies. I stayed in the shadows. I watched them. I watched Uncle Marcus cut corners on safety inspections for his trucks. I watched Aunt Victoria use sweatshop labor to make her luxury handbags. I watched Preston run a Ponzi scheme disguised as a crypto exchange. They were leveraged to the hilt. They lived on debt, maintaining an image of wealth while their foundations rotted. And for the last 6 months, I had been quietly buying that debt. Every loan, every promissory note, every mortgage. I checked my watch. It was 8:00 p.m. The markets in Tokyo were opening. The margin calls were scheduled for exactly 1 minute from now. I stood up. The folding chair scraped loudly against the floor. Aunt Victoria frowned. She asked where I was going. She told me to sit down and finish my soggy stuffing before I cleared the table for the dessert course. I didn't sit. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small remote control. I pointed it at the large television screen mounted above the fireplace, the one playing a football game on mute. I changed the channel, not to a game, but to a PowerPoint presentation cast from my phone. The screen went black. Then a logo appeared in stark white letters, ARG's Capital. Uncle Marcus squinted. He asked what the hell that was. He said RG's Capital was the firm that had been harassing his CFO for weeks. I smiled. I walked to the head of the table. I stood directly behind Aunt Victoria. I spoke clearly, my voice cutting through the room. I said, "I'd like to propose a toast." Preston laughed. He yelled, "Sit down, janitor. Nobody wants to hear your toast." I ignored him. I looked at Marcus. I said, "I'm thankful for logistics, specifically the logistics of debt. You see, Uncle Marcus, when you defaulted on your fleet loans 3 months ago, the bank was going to seize your trucks. But then a nice anonymous buyer swooped in and bought the debt." Marcus went pale. He dropped his fork. I clicked the remote. The screen changed to a document. It was a transfer of ownership. I said, "That buyer was me." The room went deadly silent. I continued. I told him that as of 8:01 p.m. tonight, I was exercising the acceleration clause in his contract. Since he had missed 3 payments he skipped to buy the Bentley sitting in the driveway, the entire loan was due immediately. $40 million. Marcus stood up, his face purple. He shouted that I was lying. He shouted that I didn't have $40, let alone 40 million. My phone buzzed. I looked at it. "Check your email, Marcus," I said. Marcus fumbled for his phone. He opened his email. I watched his face crumble. The notification from his bank and the legal notice from Argus Capital were there. He slumped back into his chair, gasping for air. I turned to the mini-boss, Cousin Preston. He wasn't laughing anymore. He was staring at me, his mouth open. I clicked the remote. The screen changed to a series of server logs. I said, "I'm also thankful for cybersecurity. You see, Preston, when you built CoinEpex, you didn't build your own servers. You rented them from a hosting provider called Nebula Data." Preston's eyes widened. He whispered, No way." I nodded. I said, "I own Nebula Data, and I took a look at your traffic. It's fascinating. You're not trading crypto. You're just moving money from new users to pay off old users. It's a classic Ponzi scheme." Preston jumped up. He tried to grab the remote. I stepped back easily. I said, "Don't worry. I didn't shut down your servers. That would be rude. Instead, I forwarded the logs to the SEC and the FBI. They should be arriving, well, judging by the sirens I hear in the distance, any minute now. Preston ran to the window. Blue and red lights were flashing at the bottom of the driveway. He turned back to me, tears streaming down his face. He begged. He said he could fix it. He said we were cousins. He asked me to delete the logs. I looked at him. I asked him if he wanted to Venmo me $5 for a lawyer. Finally, I looked down at Aunt Victoria, the matriarch. She was trembling. Her hands were clutching the tablecloth so hard her knuckles were white. She whispered, "You can't touch me. My brand is global. I own my company." I clicked the remote one last time. An image of a foreclosure notice appeared on the screen. I leaned in close to her ear. I said, "Victoria, you don't own your company. You sold 40% of it to investors 5 years ago to stay afloat. You leveraged another 30% last year. And the remaining 30%? You put it up as collateral for the loan on this house." I paused for effect. I said, "I bought the investors out last week. I bought the bank loan yesterday. And this morning, I called a board meeting. You weren't invited." Victoria let out a strangled sob. She asked what I did. I told her I voted to remove CEO for gross incompetence and embezzlement of company funds. "You're fired, Aunt Victoria," I said softly. "And since this house is company property and you are no longer an employee, you're trespassing." The chaos that followed was a symphony of destruction. Preston was arrested in the foyer. He was crying, screaming for his mother as the agents cuffed him. He tried to bribe them with crypto that didn't exist. Uncle Marcus was on the phone with his lawyers, screaming that he was ruined, that they were seizing his trucks, that his life was over. He threw a glass of scotch at the wall, shattering it. And Aunt Victoria, she just sat there, the queen of the Thanksgiving table, dethroned by the boy she made sit on a folding chair. She looked up at me, her eyes red, her makeup running. She played her final card, the guilt card. She said, "James, we are family. We took you in. We fed you. How can you do this? This is evil." I looked at the lavish spread of food. I looked at the diamonds on her fingers, diamonds bought with my parents' money. I picked up her crystal goblet. I took a sip of her wine. I said, "I'm not evil, Aunt Victoria. I'm just a businessman. And I've decided to liquidate my toxic assets." I placed the glass down. I turned to the security team I had waiting in the kitchen. "My security team, clear the table," I ordered. Epilogue. 6 months later, I sat in the same dining room. The decor was different. I had removed the gaudy gold statues and replaced them with modern art. The table was set for one. My assistant walked in. She handed me a tablet. She said there was an update on the previous tenants. I swiped through the file. Uncle Marcus was driving a delivery truck for Amazon. It was poetic. The logistics tycoon, now worrying about bathroom breaks and delivery quotas. Cousin Preston was awaiting trial. He had tried to cut a plea deal by ratting out his mother, but nobody wanted her info. He was facing 10 years. And Aunt Victoria, she was working retail. Just as she had prayed for me, she was a greeter at a department store, forced to smile at customers who bought knockoff versions of the bags she used to design. I put the tablet down. My chef brought out my dinner, a simple steak, perfectly cooked. I poured myself a glass of vintage red wine. I raised it to the empty room, to the silence, to the peace. "I am thankful," I whispered to no one. I took a sip. It tasted like absolute victory. Imagine the most expensive wedding venue in the state on the most perfect Saturday in June. White roses everywhere. String quartet playing Vivaldi. 300 guests in designer clothes. And right by the valet stand, in a cheap black polo and khakis, there I am. My own brother walks past me, shoves his keys into my chest, and says loud enough for the entire receiving line to hear, "Try not to scratch it this time, little bro. Parking cars is the only thing you've ever been good at." Everyone laughs. My parents shake their heads like I'm the family embarrassment. 40 minutes later, those same guests watch armed security drag my brother, still in his tuxedo, out of his own reception while the bride screams my name. This is the story of how the brother they treated like a servant turned out to own the castle they were getting married in. Stay until the end. The part where my father tries to pay the bill is pure gold. Let's go back 8 years, so you understand why I let them humiliate me that long. I was never the son my parents bragged about. That was always Ethan. Captain of everything, Harvard Business School, engaged to an influencer with 600,000 followers. I was the quiet one who dropped out of college sophomore year to flip houses nobody wanted. My parents called it manual labor. They told everyone I was finding myself because they were ashamed to admit their son worked with his hands. What they never knew was that the first house I bought for $22,000 at a tax auction is now worth $4.8 million. I kept buying foreclosures, abandoned estates, properties so ugly banks wouldn't touch them. I turned them into cash. 5 years ago, I found the crown jewel, a crumbling 1920s mansion on 50 acres an hour outside the city. The bank was desperate. I paid cash. I spent 2 years and $12 million restoring it to better than original condition. I turned it into the most exclusive wedding and event venue in the country. The Ashford Estate. Booked solid for the next 4 years. Celebrities, politicians, royalty, and I never put my name on the website. The public face is a management company. To my family, I'm still the dropout who does something with real estate and can barely afford rent. Ethan announced his engagement last year and chose the Ashford Estate for the wedding. He bragged to everyone it was the only place good enough for him. My parents offered to pay for everything to show off. I let them. I even gave them the family discount through the sales team. 30% off. They never knew the discount was actually 100% because I own the place. The contract was signed under the LLC. My name appears exactly nowhere. I told the venue manager, Lauren, to treat me like any other staff member the day of the wedding. I wanted to see how far they would go when they thought I was powerless. The morning of the wedding, I showed up in the staff polo. Ethan saw me and lost it. He screamed that I was embarrassing him in front of his future in-laws. He told me the only way I was allowed on the property was if I worked. He literally handed me the valet keys and said, "Park cars. Stay out of sight. And for God's sake, don't talk to any guests." My mother pulled me aside and whispered that if I ruined one photo, she would never speak to me again. My father slipped me a $50 bill for gas and told me to try to act normal for once. I took the keys, I smiled, and I parked every single car that day. Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, vintage Ferraris. Guests asked me to pose for photos with their cars. I did. Every time Ethan walked past, he made a comment. "Faster, valet. Don't block the entrance with your existence." The photographer even caught him on video flicking a tip at me like I was a stripper. That clip went viral later, but not for the reason he thought. The ceremony came and went. Ethan married Chloe in front of 400 people who still believed I was the hired help. Then the reception started. Open bar. 10-course dinner. Fireworks display that cost more than most people's houses. At 8:30, the venue manager, Lauren, found me by the valet stand. She was nervous. She whispered, "They're ready for the big entrance. Are you sure you want to wait until now?" I told her it was time. I walked through the staff entrance, past the kitchen, and straight into the grand ballroom. 300 guests were seated. Ethan and Chloe were about to have their first dance. The lights dimmed. The string quartet stopped. I stepped onto the small stage where the band had been playing. I took the microphone. The room went silent. Ethan saw me and turned red. He marched toward the stage, shouting, "What the hell are you doing? Get off." I spoke into the mic, calm and clear. "Good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Logan Ashford, and I own this venue. You could have heard a champagne bubble pop, I continued. Today has been educational. I've parked your cars. I've been tipped like a servant. I've been told I'm an embarrassment by my own family. So before the first dance, I thought I'd clear a few things up. I nodded to Lauren. The lights came up. The massive screen behind me lit up with the property deed, the LLC paperwork, and finally a photo of me holding the original purchase contract from 5 years ago. My name in bold. Logan Ashford, sole owner of the Ashford estate. The room erupted in gasps. Ethan froze halfway to the stage. Chloe's jaw actually dropped. My mother fainted into her chair. My father looked like he was having a stroke. I kept going. Ethan, you booked your wedding at the venue I own. Mom, Dad, you paid for a wedding at the house I bought with the money you said I'd never make. And all day you treated me like the help. So here's what's going to happen now. I turned to the security team. 6 men in black suits who had been waiting in the wings. Please escort my brother, his new wife, and my parents off the property immediately. Their reservation ended 5 minutes ago. Ethan started screaming, "You can't do this. This is my wedding." I looked at him and smiled. "Actually, this is my house, and you're trespassing." Security moved in. 2 guards grabbed Ethan by the arms. He was still in his tuxedo, bow tie crooked, face purple. Chloe was shrieking, veil flying, trying to hit the guards with her bouquet. My mother was crying hysterically, mascara running down her face like war paint. My father tried the reasonable approach. "Son, we're family. Let's talk about this." I looked at him. Family doesn't make family park cars at their own property. You have 10 minutes to leave before I call the police for trespassing. The best part, the guests started clapping, slowly at first, then louder. Some even stood. They watched my family get marched out past the ice sculptures and the $10,000 cake. Ethan was barefoot. Security had taken his shoes so he couldn't run. Chloe lost a $6,000 heel in the gravel. My mother kept screaming my name like I was murdering them. I just stood on stage and waved goodbye. 6 months later, the Ashford estate is more popular than ever. We've raised prices 20% and we're still booked solid. Ethan and Chloe's wedding photos never made it to the magazine. Instead, the video of the groom being carried out by security went viral. 42 million views and counting. They're getting divorced already. My parents lost most of their friends. Nobody wants to be associated with that level of entitlement. Last month, Ethan showed up at my office begging for a job. Any job, even valet. I told him we don't hire people who throw keys at the staff. He cried in the lobby. Security escorted him out again. Some habits die hard. These days I still park my own car at the staff entrance. Old habit, but now I do it in a car that costs more than their house. And every time I walk through the gates of the estate, I bought with the money they swore I'd never earn. I remember one thing. Real wealth isn't loud. It doesn't need to brag. It just waits quietly in the shadows until the perfect day to take the microphone and remind everyone who really holds the keys. If you've ever been treated like the help by your own family, type keys in the comments right now. Smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. New story every single day. See you tomorrow for another round of Karma's Last Laugh. Then they took Linda. As they marched her out the front door, she tried to dig her heels into the expensive rug. She shouted that she owned this house. She shouted that I was ungrateful. Mr. Blackwood followed them to the door. He handed the officers a file. He told them to add trespassing to the embezzlement charges. The door slammed shut. The party was over. The guests filed out in silence, keeping their heads down, terrified that I might turn my forensic gaze on them next. An hour later, the house was quiet. The catering staff had packed up, leaving me a plate of leftovers and a bottle of vintage wine. I sat in my father's favorite armchair by the fire. The Christmas tree lights were still twinkling. Mr. Blackwood sat opposite me. He handed me a glass of wine. He asked if I wanted to sell the house. I looked around. I saw the memories of my father before Linda. I saw the potential. I told him no. I told him I was going to restore it. I told him I was going to turn it into exactly what my father wanted, a place for people who had lost everything to fraud. I took a sip of the wine. Epilogue. 3 months later, I was in the garden supervising the landscaping crew. The snow had melted and the first crocuses were pushing through the soil. A beat-up sedan pulled up to the gate. It was Linda. She looked 10 years older. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes cheap. She was out on bail, awaiting trial. She walked up to the gate. She didn't yell. She looked defeated. She asked if I had seen a box of photos. She said she left her personal albums in the attic. She asked if she could just come in for 5 minutes to get them. I looked at her. I thought about the waste management brochure. I picked up the intercom phone. I told her that all personal items left on the premises after the eviction date were considered abandoned property. I told her that per her suggestion, I had hired a very efficient waste removal service. I told her the albums were gone. She started to cry. Real tears this time. She asked why I had to be so cruel. I looked her in the eye through the bars of the gate. I told her that I finally amounted to something. I amounted to the consequences of her actions. I hung up the phone and turned my back. I walked back toward the house, leaving her standing alone on the other side of the gate, exactly where she belonged. Imagine this. The most expensive ballroom in the city, crystal chandeliers, 1,000 people in black tie, and right in the middle, my own brother points at me and screams, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "Get on your knees and clean that up, janitor." The scotch is dripping from his $8,000 tuxedo. Everyone is staring. My parents are laughing. And 30 seconds later, the CEO of the entire company drops to one knee in front of me and calls me sir. This is the exact moment the family that threw me away realized they had been living in a house I secretly owned for 7 years. Keep watching until the end, because what happened to my brother 6 months later is the sweetest part. To understand how I ended up holding all the cards that night, you have to go back to when I was 19. I was never the golden child. That title belonged to Richard. Perfect grades, perfect smile, perfect lies. I was the quiet one who spent nights in the basement writing code instead of going to parties. At 21, I built something revolutionary, an encryption engine that could predict cyber attacks before they happened. I called it Aegis. Experts told me it was worth billions, but I knew the second I put my real name on it, the sharks would tear me apart. So I did something crazy. I created a shell company. I hired David Sterling, the most charismatic man I'd ever met, to be the public face and CEO. I buried my name 8 layers deep in corporate filings. I became the silent partner and eventually the majority shareholder. When Ethelgard Technologies went public and hit a $42 billion valuation, I could have bought islands. Instead, I did something no one understood. I took the night janitor job at our own headquarters, because at 3 a.m., when the building is empty, I have access to every server room, every office, every trash can. I see who really works. I see who steals. And I saw exactly what kind of person my brother became the day he was hired. 2 years ago, Richard walked into Ethelgard like he owned the place. He had no idea the loser brother he mocked at every family dinner was the reason the company even existed. I watched him scream at receptionists until they cried. I found the fake receipts he submitted, $180 lunches that were actually McDonald's. I read the emails where he took credit for deals. My algorithms closed. I kept a file, a very thick file. Tonight was the company Christmas Gala. My mother forced Richard to invite me for the family photo. In the car he laid down the rules. Don't talk to anyone important. Don't tell them what you do. Stay in the corner and pretend you're invisible. I wore the same grey suit I wear to clean toilet. I stood by the coat check holding lukewarm water while Richard held court with executives. Then he saw me. He marched over, grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise and hissed, "You look like a homeless person. Go get me a scotch from the VIP bar. And make yourself useful for once." As I walked away, he announced to a group of vice presidents, "That's my brother. Still pushes a broom at 32. Some people just refuse to evolve." The laughter cut deeper than any knife. I came back with the Macallan 25. Richard saw his chance for a public execution. The second I extended the glass, he deliberately slapped it out of my hand. Scotch exploded across his shirt and the marble floor. He screamed, "You did that on purpose, you clumsy idiot." My mother rushed in, dabbing his shirt, apologizing to everyone. "I'm so sorry, he's always been slow." Then Richard pointed at the puddle. "Clean it up. On your knees. Do your job, janitor. Show the CEO why we keep trash like you around." My father nodded. "Listen to your brother for once in your life." 200 people formed a circle. Phones came out. Richard folded his arms, smirking, waiting for me to break. I didn't move. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a matte black card with a single gold chip, the skeleton key. Only one exists. I tapped it slowly against my thigh. Click, click, click. The sound echoed in the dead silent ballroom. I looked at David Sterling standing 10 feet away. His face went white. He started walking toward us. Fast. Richard laughed. "What is that, your bus pass?" "Security. Get this lunatic out of." David reached us. He didn't look at Richard. He looked only at me. He stopped 2 feet away and bowed, deep, from the waist. Then he straightened and said, loud enough for the entire room, "Good evening, sir. I'm so sorry to interrupt your evening." My mother blinked. "Excuse me. That's my son, the janitor." David never took his eyes off me. "Ma'am, your son is the founder, chairman and majority shareholder of Ethelgard Technologies. He quite literally owns this building, this company, and every penny in it. You need to picture their faces." Richard's mouth opened and stayed open. No sound came out. My mother's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered. My father aged 10 years in 3 seconds. Richard finally found his voice, a pathetic squeak. This is a joke, right?" I stepped forward until we were inches apart. I spoke softly so only the circle heard at first, then louder. "For 2 years I've watched you bully staff, steal money and take credit for my work. I kept you employed because you're blood. Tonight you crossed the last line." I turned to David. "Revoke Richard's credentials. Freeze his accounts. Full forensic audit by morning. If even 1 cent is missing, hand it to the FBI yourself." David was already typing. "Yes, sir. Done." Richard dropped to his knees, not to clean but because his legs failed. He grabbed my pants. "Please, we're family." I didn't know. I looked down at him. Family doesn't order family to crawl on the floor in front of 500 people. Security. My security appeared from the shadows. 2 agents in $10,000 suits lifted Richard by the armpits. He was sobbing, snot running down his chin, tuxedo soaked in scotch and shame. My mother started screaming. "You can't do this to your own brother." I looked at her. "I just did." My father tried one last power play. "Son, think about what you're doing. That's your little brother." I signaled the guards. "Escort all 3 of them out. Persona non grata list, worldwide. Permanent." As they were dragged away, Richard wailing, mother shrieking, father silent and broken, something beautiful happened. 1 person started clapping, then 10, then the entire ballroom. Slow, steady, thunderous applause. Not for me, for justice. 6 months later, I still take the night shift twice a week. The servers hum the same. The building still smells of lemon polish at 3 a.m. Richard's indictment hits the papers next month. $3.4 million embezzled. He sold the Porsche, the watch collection, and finally the house. Last week he applied for a night custodian position at one of our subsidiary offices. HR sent me the resume. I wrote a single line on it and sent it back. Candidate ordered previous employees to clean floors on their knees. Declined. My parents tried to visit the lobby 17 times. Security has standing orders. David now personally ensures every member of the custodial staff receives a Christmas bonus, larger than Richard's old salary, and an invitation to the gala as VIP guests. Some nights, when the building is empty, I still push the mop myself, because I learned something they never did. Real power doesn't scream. It doesn't need a $10,000 tuxedo. It just waits, quietly, until the perfect moment. And when that moment comes, it doesn't say a word. It just watches them clean up their own mess. If you've ever been the invisible one in your family, drop the word clean in the comments right now. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. New story every single day. I'll see you tomorrow for another dose of Karma's Last Laugh.